Welcome back to another episode of the Emergent Approach to Strategy with our guest, Peter Compo. Thanks for joining us once again.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Great to have you back, man. We're going to do an episode now, brief episode compared to some of the other ones on execution, which is chapter 9 for those who are reading along with us. And then we're going to finish with one last episode, the concluding episode, tugging at a little bit of strings here and there, threads here and there throughout the second part of the book, which is real application stuff. It is one of the most deeply researched books in one book that brings all these different things together. Military is in there, other strategists are in there, all their work and thinking is in there as well. So it's a pleasure to get through it. So let's start with execution. Peter, I'm going to set you up again, as I've done in previous episodes, with a lovely paragraph from this chapter. You say, leaders, strategy writers, and analysts attribute disproportionate blame for success and failure to execution. We do that all the time ourselves. With strategy so often missing and confused, it is easy to invoke execution as the reason for poor or good results. A media pundit might say, wow, Courier Inc. beat the street's earnings estimate by 25 cents a share. They really executed. Well, maybe, as Peter said, Courier, this made-up company, executed, and maybe they didn't. Maybe they pulled sales into the quarter by signing bad contracts or gave discounts that will haunt them in the future or put cost into inventory. We know this stuff happens. Currency may have gone their way, or a competitor may have screwed up or gone out of business. Leadership may have defunded programs, like we talked about in the previous episode, for a short-term gain to protect their position to boost earnings. For business unit leaders, pulling in next quarter's sales may be execution if the CEO demands it, but investors might not always see it that way. How often would a constant demand for more steam each quarter be viewed as execution? Not to mention, what portion of the results in any given quarter is determined by actions in those 3 months. There's so much in there, so much that we see wrong in organizations. Some of us have witnessed this stuff: sandbagging, bringing revenue forward, just closing sales, getting in the paperwork that the sale is over the line, knowing it's a poor customer. 08 and 09, all this stuff is in there. Over to you, Peter, to talk to us about the context for this chapter.
Yeah, it's a heavy chapter. And I think what your introduction alludes to is that we associate execution with outcomes. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And maybe two big categories. One is that if you don't really have a definition of strategy, and if your definition of strategy is more goal-based and lists of goals, then really you don't have a choice then to say execution means, well, meeting all those goals. In essence, get good results as a definition of execution. I think another reason is that leaders are put in the position of driving their people, right? And it's easy for them to have in their head, if only my people would execute. We've got the goals, we've got the strategy. The only missing piece here is, did we do it? Are we doing it all? And there's truth in there, right? Did the people really do what they were supposed to do? Did I do what I was supposed to do? Maybe we had that, right? For the leader to ask themselves. But I think this all loses something very important, that if execution is just getting good outcomes, why would we even need the word? Why wouldn't we just say execution? Why wouldn't we just say get good results, deliver? It wouldn't add any value to have the term. I think many people use the term execution and replacement just for like implement or get good results because it sounds better, right? It sounds like you're saying something. It sounds like you're saying something sophisticated, but you're not. So I think the theory of strategy brings out a completely different view of what execution is.
You say also execution is sometimes defined as operational excellence, and this is actually what a lot of people think it is. And we talked about sports before, we talked about music before, and you say here, like when an analyst might say, Company X better stop all this innovation stuff and get back to executing, which we hear a lot in innovation world. Or as one consulting firm said, it's no secret innovation is difficult for well-established companies. By and large, they are better executors than innovators, and most succeed less through game-changing creativity than by optimizing their existing businesses. I've said that. So we all make those mistakes. And I want to remind here everybody that's been following us that Peter tells us discipline and innovation are inseparable. And if anything I've learned through doing all these shows, interviewing all these great people, is discipline is absolutely at the heart of innovation. And it's not seen that way. And maybe you have some thoughts on that.
I think this is the crux, what you brought in here, that execution, to be a useful concept, an additive concept, has to relate to the discipline of adhering to to the strategy rules and to the rest of the strategy framework. And to think that you don't need discipline or that you don't need execution in order to innovate is a terrible message. How about musicians? How about artists? You don't think that they have to execute? What does execute mean in creating a piece of music? Does it mean, I don't even know what it would mean if it's the opposite of innovation. It would have no meaning. What it would be, to write the same type of pieces over and over? That wouldn't be anybody's idea of execution. So the definition of strategy as a central rule and tactics as rules, and then an entire framework that's built around that for the practitioner's framework, I think you can only get to execution defined as, did you put the work in to adhere to the strategy framework, to adhere to the hypothesis that you said would get you to good results? See this difference? If execution is just get good results, why would you need a strategy at all? You would just need a plan and just go do it. But it doesn't work that way. You can't directly plan good results. That's why you have a guiding strategy that enables you to take trade-offs and accept pains and accept bad things in return for even greater big things. And for the fact that at the beginning of an endeavor, new product line development, improving a sports team, changing a military, anything, you name it, it's going to take time and you're going to have many choices to make as you go. And you need a guiding strategy to tell you how to make those choices. And execution will so many times be, did you adhere to the strategy to make those choices, even though at that moment it might be seductive to do something else, right? Our strategy is that we're not going to sell to customers of this type anymore. And then someone shows up one day with a very lucrative possibility to sell to a customer just like that. What's execution? Is it to do it because now at this moment it's going to boost earnings for a quarter? Or is it to say, no, we've got a higher rule here that keeps us from being seduced by these short-term local things? That's, to me, execution. Sticking with what you said the theory of the case was, despite seduction of things that come at you. And this is exactly the same in music, or any arts. I talk about music a lot because it's my field. You come up with a phrase, with a harmony, with a rhythm that is very seductive on its own, Man, that's great. I love it. I got to get this in here. But it doesn't fit with the strategy of the piece. It's a local thing that doesn't fit with the whole. What's execution? To go with it because you get this beautiful little section? Or is it to say, no, either I got to change the style of the entire piece to add it, or I got to take that bit and put it into the next piece where it makes sense. Execution is a brutal thing. To stick with the theory of the case, stick with the strategy framework you've designed until it's very clear that you should change it. And that's really hard to do.
And it comes right back to where we started all this, is that your strategy is like a guiding force to help you make those decisions in real time. So you can actually go, does it get me closer? Does it work towards that strategy to make that decision in real time? I thought about this on a personal level, because like you with music, mine was sports. And for example, the science of training has come on so much since when I played professional. And the only thing I was disciplined. I wasn't that talented. I was disciplined. But I was disciplined often doing the wrong thing. And because I was doing the wrong thing really well, I got injured.
Mm.
So I trained harder than many of my colleagues in the gym, but we were doing the wrong exercises. And
Mm.
that still haunts me today, in that I still go to the gym most days, 5, 6 days a week. And it's not getting me much more advanced. It's actually trying to undo a lot of those bad habits that I became really good at doing back in the day. And this spoke to me as a metaphor for doing the right thing worse, because you could be accelerating the demise of your company if you're a brilliant executor with the wrong strategy.
See, I think you're bringing in a great example of where execution is confused as a definition and as a concept. Let's give another example that's related to your sports example. You had what you're describing is that you had a strategy of exercise, a theory of exercise, right? That turned out to be wrong. Your execution actually was excellent. So let's give another example. I read one by a famous strategy writer who said, execution is a bankrupt concept, has no value. Why? And he gave an example that's just like yours. Ford, modern day Ford, back in the maybe 2008, 2007, somewhere in there, had really worked hard on production of the cars, quality, throughput, cost. And they were really putting out cars at a better rate in a better way than they had before. But it turns out nobody wanted the cars they were making. Exaggerating, actually. But the point that this writer made was execution is a bankrupt concept because actually their cars were not the designs that people wanted. But that's blaming the wrong thing. Can't you have a bad strategy? Here's another beautiful example of blaming everything, good and bad, on execution. Whereas the problem with Ford at that time was their diagnosis of what the market needed and what they should produce and the strategy for doing that. And it's exactly what you just described in sports. Another angle on sports I'd like to bring out on execution is how many times will a strategy be in place for a team on how to win against a specific opponent, but then the players in the heat of the moment get seduced by an opportunity, right? A simple example, right? We're going to double team the best player on the other side. We're not going to let that. This is a very famous generic strategy in sports, right? We're not going to let the best player on that other team beat us. We're going to force it that the lesser players have to do it. It's an extremely valid strategy. But then in the heat of the moment, all of a sudden, a player who's part of that double team sees an opportunity to do something, look like a hero, right? Now, and they go ahead and they violate the double team rule and they even get a goal, or they get a good roll, or I'm sorry, in rugby, right? What do you call
A
it when you
try,
get
yeah, a try.
when you get a try, whatever you want to call it? Even if you got a good result, did you execute? No, you violated the strategy. Execution only has meaning because it should allow for failure. And it should allow for the case that a good result was poor execution. Because maybe in one game it worked, but now what about over the whole season?
Let's give the example, the Vince Lombardi story you tell in the book, because I love that, and the flexibility in the moment. And what struck me about this example was Lombardi right, or was the Hall of Famer right?
Well, for those who might not know, in American football, there is a legendary coach named Vince Lombardi, who was most famous for coaching the Green Bay Packers football team in Wisconsin, in the upper Midwest and in the States, to, I think it was 5 championships over 8 years or something like that. He won the first 2 Super Bowls as well. I think it was 67 and 68. And he had a player at the end of one of those Super Bowls that had a very specific assignment. And American football is extremely regimented about what everybody's supposed to do for each play. It's not as fluid as rugby and world football, soccer. And
Depends on the
so
coach, man. It depends on the coach
the coach,
and the
but these plays,
strategy.
they're all in American football, they're all very set plays, right? Each offensive play it starts, the clock starts, and then you play out what happens. And a defensive player on Green Bay saw an opportunity to what was called a blitz, where you run like a maniac to try to get the quarterback who's trying to throw it. And he did this blitz and got the guy and really won the game because of it, because the other team was about to score. And what did Vince Lombardi say to him afterwards? He was mad at him. He was mad at him because he didn't follow his assignment. He did something that violated it. And this brings out a really important thing, is that sometimes when you're on the front line, there has to be flexibility to improvise. But I think any coach, any leader would agree that these should be the exceptions, and that when you're doing it, you should be aware of the deviation from what the plan was, what your strategy requirements were, that there should be a tension around that so that the organization maintains its discipline in the long term, because seasons aren't made out of great single occasional plays. Seasons are made out of the discipline of sticking to the strategy.
And you see this where, in every sport, there's a enigmatic player who
Mhm.
may be a prima donna or may be perceived as a prima donna. Why the heck aren't they picking Compo? Compo should be in that team. He's amazing. He looks amazing. He's able to do amazing things, amazing skill. But the coach won't pick him either because he's the wrong characteristics for the organization or the team, or to your point, he doesn't fit the way the coach wants to play. He doesn't fit the strategy. So he may be brilliant on his own in isolation. He may be brilliant when things are loose, but for the strategy the coach wants, you just don't fit. And I say that because I wanted to make this a little bit human as well, because when we're talking about strategy, I think a lot more and more about people's lives, that we're entering into this period where AI is definitely going to disrupt the workplace. And people are going to find themselves at odds with where they belong and maybe struggling from a resilience perspective, etc. And knowing thyself becomes really important. And I say all that to say that conceiving execution as getting good results doesn't allow for any failure. And this is really important. That's why I brought up the thing about the sports, to try and make it relative to people, is that you like, I often think about working somewhere, Peter, that you can be working really, really hard in the wrong organization and constantly having problems with mental health, physical health as a result of your mental health, whatever it might be. But you're still working really, really hard. And if you zoomed out a little bit and went, actually, I can still work hard in a different place and get way better results, because maybe the strategy's better, maybe the timing's better, maybe it's not a sunset business or a sunset industry. All those things become really important. And I thought you'd have some thoughts on this, just not only from a life perspective, but that equates also into an organization.
I think that what you're bringing out touches again on the distinction between execution and strategy, and that they are two completely different things, and get good results doesn't describe that. If people are straining, right? If people are unhappy, if people are struggling, maybe it's because they are trying to execute what they believe to be the right things to do. And they're executing brilliantly, in a sense. And this comes up, Ford executing brilliantly on the wrong cars, or you're weightlifting on the wrong regime. And that you've got to use, I think what it brings out is that you've got to use good execution as a way to judge the strategy, as a way to say, well, do we have the right theory of the case here? Unless you execute, how could you even know? How could you know whether a strategy is right or wrong if you don't actually adhere to it to be able to judge? And so when I think about people that you describe who are struggling, they've got to be able to articulate, well, why is it I'm doing what I'm doing? Why is this the way I'm living? Is it because I'm not doing what I said I would do? Or is it that what I said I would do just doesn't make any sense? And I think the power of execution as a concept is only brought in when we think of it as adhering to the theory of the case versus, am I getting good results?
Should we mention, Peter, the Demming's red bead experiment?
Uh, we've Demming's been a bit lost over the years. If you were in a corporation in the 90s, you heard Demming all the time, and maybe you went to one of his meetings that he would do, and got this book, and he was quite a guy. Also, he wrote music too. He would write very old style classical music, symphonies and oratorios and things like that. But he had a very famous demonstration that he would do in these big seminars, and it was called the Red Beads. And it was really quite hilarious. There was a big pile of beads. 20% of them, I may not get every detail right. 20% were white and 80% were red, and they were all identical beads. And he had a little paddle that you shove into this well-mixed thing, and he would say, your job is to get as many red beads as possible. And then he would bring up like 5 people out of the audience, and then one was like a checker and one was a boss. And they would go through this ritual of putting in the paddle and coming out, and then they would count how many red beads, right? And if you got a lot of red beads, he would say, great job. You're really a good worker. Fantastic. And if you got only a few, and of course, right, how many you got was completely random, because you had no way of picking out white or red beads at all. You just stuck in this paddle and pulled out whatever came out. And then someone would come in and they would get very few red beads. And he'd say, hey, buddy, you want a job here? Because you're not doing the job, and you are in trouble. It was very funny. He would go through this whole routine. But if you really accepted it for what he was trying to express, There was no execution there at all. It was totally random noise. And that we were judging execution by good results in a totally random process. And in how many corporations is whether you do well in a given quarter or safety results, for example, are they just part of a distribution over time, a time series where you can have good results for a period or you can have bad results for a period? And you end up attributing things to execution that aren't execution at all.
I thought that was such an important thing for innovation, Peter, as well, because I was thinking about how that distribution, so it's an uneven distribution. And say you're working on the future in innovation. So you are in a legacy organization, you're the change maker, you're the catalyst, you're the person trying to drive change, the corporate explorer, whatever stuff you did in DuPont. And you're trying to drive change, or you're trying to introduce a new product. And that marketplace is small. So a place I saw this firsthand was in a legacy media company being the digital transformation agent. So bringing in new digital revenue. And you were consistently fighting with those who resisted change. The analog traditional sales, of course, that marketplace was bigger, but you were having these really small wins. And like a 50 grand win was huge at the start because there was nothing there to begin with. And then the next year, 250, the next year, 500, whatever. And I thought about this red bead experiment, that you were getting this sport. You should have been getting a more commendment for actually driving that type of change despite the existing marketplace, because the marketplace was going to this place in the future and you were investing in that future. So that was one thing. And then I thought about Sven Smith, who we had on the show from McKinsey, in his book Strategy Beyond the Hockey Stick. He talked about, say, for example, you're a police chief and you go, we think the killer's in one of these three places, and send one squad to point A, one to point B, one to point C. And then the one that comes back and apprehends the murderer, you're like, well done to you. And to the other two, you're like, going, you guys suck. You guys are disgraceful. And he's saying that's the problem, and it brings all this to life, and it's opening up all types of wounds for me as well.
No, absolutely. It's such a it's such an easy trap to fall into, to attribute cause to outcomes, right? Correlation is not causality, and execution falls into this trap. They must have executed. They must have done something right if they got a good result. Well, then we don't need the word execution. Let's just say, let's get good results. But when you do that, you throw away the whole concept of strategy.
So two more things. One is your definition of execution. I thought that was really a useful one to share for people as well. And because it makes it distinct from strategy. So maybe we'll do that very briefly. And then I wanted to share how you talk about it when something changes. So when something changes, everything needs to change, but oftentimes it doesn't if you're focused on execution.
I think this is probably what makes execution a very tricky subject. Even if you want to define it as adherence to the theory, adherence to your strategy framework that you've created to guide your actions. Well, what if conditions change and there's not time, or there's little time to talk about the whole big picture, right? To make a change to the theory.
Can I just say, hence the Lombardi thing. That guy made the decision in the moment, took it on himself, won the game.
Right. What about in a military? We had made a strategy that things, we're going to stick with this approach to attack a city, and then you find out that the adversaries aren't where you thought they were, and you've got to find a way to react to that. So execution is defined here as adhere to the strategy framework that you said you would follow and put the work in to do that, right? Execution has a work aspect, an energy and drive aspect to it. And change the framework as soon as you see it's not valid. And this makes execution very difficult. This makes life very difficult, right? When to know that you should violate and change. Because in how many cases is it you haven't really adhered to it well enough to know, or that it just takes time for a new strategy to take place? How about in a sports team where a new coach comes in and puts in a new system, a new strategy framework for how they want to play? In the first effort, is it going to come to fruition? Are you going to base whether to stick with that strategy on the results of the first few games or matches? Probably not. You need the time to see if the system can develop, whether it can emerge. And this what's make execution so difficult. Should we change, or should we stick with what we said we would do? And there's no magic recipe for this, right? And I think in many cases, this is where talent and some people just have a sense of, yeah, we said we would do it that way, but can you read the tea leaves here? Can you see what's happening? We're not in the right direction. We have to modify.
And that's the idea of the positive deviance. And also, we used to talk about in sport in player-led teams, because a coach cannot, it's not like NFL where you have the clipboard and you can call the calls. You don't have that luxury. So if a team has a philosophy of how they play, one team I played for, Toulouse, that's what we did. We played to a philosophy, and we had starter moves that would get you in the game. But after that, it was very, very difficult to defend. And they're 5 times champions. They're the most successful club in the world.
But tell me, was there not a discipline to that fluid motion? Did everybody do whatever they thought was best in their local view? Or did they have disciplines around what was valid and what was not? And that defined execution of that system.
Absolutely discipline, and discipline at playing that what looked like this fluid game. And we practiced that ad nauseum, that way of playing. And then the other moves just became starter plays to get us into that flow of things. So that was the big difference.
But Aidan, look at what this reveals. Why would you have to practice if there was no rules, if there was no discipline to the system? Why would you even need to do it? Everybody could just go off and do their own exercises and practice on their own. It reminds me of an article I read about the Brazilian football team, soccer team. And we've really come around to emergence. They said, people look at us and they think we're just improvising and just doing whatever we think's good to do. And he said, but you're missing that there is a deep, very deep discipline to our play as a team. And that's what makes us brilliant. Yes, we can deviate here and there, but it's part of a deeper scheme. And this is where the word emergence comes in any field, that the disciplines that we talk about needing for innovation are at a lower level. They're not as obvious. They don't look the same as the result you're looking for, which makes it so difficult for an outsider to say, oh boy, I can see why Toulouse, right? It was Toulouse, why they're scoring so many tries, or however you say it correctly, right? You know, why they're winning so much. I can see it. Look at how great they're playing. They don't see, maybe sophisticated watchers do, but they don't see the underlying discipline that you're following as a player necessarily. Maybe a sophisticated person does who's well-versed in the field. But this is why execution is part of innovation. You're sticking to your theory about what is going to lead to something new and something brilliant. But that theory is not just, let's do something new and let's do something brilliant. It's a strategy that says how we're going to interact, how we're going to work, how we're going to behave and make choices despite what might seem like the right thing to do at that little local instant. And I think sports is such a beautiful example of it. And if you've played professional sports like yourself at a high level, I think you see discipline and innovation side by side. But somehow in business, we don't connect the two. In fact, we see that they're opposites, and that execution is the opposite of innovation because you're adhering to rules. Well, it's not true. Execution is adhering to rules, but these low-level, sophisticated rules that don't look like the result you want. Hence the opposite test. Our strategy is to win 10% more games this year, more matches, right? Our strategy is to win these kinds of games. Our strategy is to become a better football team, a better rugby team. It all comes together with execution in many ways.
And the discipline, to bring it full circle to you, to music. I sent you that series we did with Frank Barrett on and it was essentially on freestyle jazz. And I know you love your jazz and you're a musician, and the discipline of the phrase to be able to go off and look like you're freestyling it and making it up as you're going. There's so much work behind that. It's like being fit
Yeah,
in a team. You have to be really fit to be able to play a certain style. You have to be really
right.
disciplined to be able to play a certain style of music.
Why would you need to practice? Why would you need a theory to improvise if it could be whatever you want it to be? Execution and improvisation in jazz. What do you just play anything that you feel? No, it doesn't work that way. And here's another great illustration of how deep it has to be. It may be unconscious, the rules that you're following. In many cases, it is. And in fact, I use this often in presentations. Considered the greatest jazz improviser of all time by many, an alto saxophone player from the 40s and 50s named Charlie Parker, who's legendary. Charlie Parker said, learn the changes, then forget them. What are the changes? They're the chord structure, the harmony of a tune over which you improvise. When you're no longer playing the melody, the standard melody, you improvise over those. At his time, you improvise over that chord structure. What did he say? Learn the changes and then forget them. And what did he mean? He meant internalize the tune so deeply, internalize the harmonic structures so deeply that when you improvise, you could adhere to it in a way that makes sense. But you don't even have to be conscious of it because it's so deep. Another illustration of emergence of innovations at a high level, his brilliant improvisations came from rules and disciplines at such a low level that he didn't even have to think about. And I know in sports, it's exactly the same. You don't think about every activity you do, every move you make. It's unconscious. We call it muscle memory, but it's mind memory, right? Translated to the memory, to the muscles.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it talks to so much stuff. Your cognitive capacity in high stakes, when you don't have to think about that. It's literally like people used to say to me in sport, you're thinking too much. You're thinking about it too much. I didn't know what they meant when I was a kid. Now I know what they mean. And it's that freedom of thought to be able to make. And this is why you see the best players in the world having that time on the ball or the time in the moment. It looks like they're playing a computer game. They see things in slow motion. And these are the things that only come to you in age. And I'm sure it's the same in music as well when you get into that flow state.
Exactly the same. And why can't we get to this ideal in business as well? An organization, people become so internalized of the reality that they're dealing with and that the reality they want to create, that they don't have to think about every little detail every minute. Like the 5 disqualifiers, it's in their gut, it's in their heart. They've learned it and they can forget about it because they're going to do it naturally. That's execution.
Mic drop. Well done, man. That's beautiful. For people who want to find out more and internalize how to do emergent strategy, how to do proper strategy, where's the best place to find you, Peter?
Well, you can Of course, on Amazon.com around the world, you can find the book Emergent Approach to Strategy.
And an audiobook now is available.
Audiobook is now available. You can go to the website emergentapproach.com, which has chapter supplements and additional examples and guidebook. And then you can look for me on LinkedIn, Peter Compo, where I post often, and you can get lots of little tidbits about the book where I'll post about a particular figure or particular concept and expand on it a little bit. So those 3 places.
Absolute pleasure, man. As always, I learned loads, really internalizing this, making it implicit myself. So I'll be able to play strategy like jazz in the future. Author of The Emergent Approach to Strategy, Peter Compo. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Aidan.